What's up, you guys? Welcome back to my channel. My name is Danielle Hallen, and I am back with another true crime video. We're going to be speaking about the 2019 disappearance of 18-year-old backpacker Theo Hayez. His case is very well known in Australia and Europe, and it's brought forward a lot of calls for changes in legislation. His disappearance is so eerily similar to so many cases that I have covered on this channel. A young man that's been kicked out of a bar ends up on his own and disappears. But with Theo, there's a huge chance that he may have ended up with a stranger somewhere along the way. His movements were so closely tracked throughout the entire night, and it seems that he navigated an unfamiliar area with ease, almost as if he were a local, which has raised a lot of red flags. While police seem to believe that this is just a case of misadventure, Theo's family, the community, several outside experts, and the coroner believe it is just as possible something else happened entirely. So let's get into the details. Theo was born in Belgium in 2001, and growing up, he was known for being very intelligent. He was known for working hard at everything that he did. Theo was curious. He loved to adventure, and most of the time you could find him exploring outside. He spent a ton of time traveling, seeing new things, and he loved to enjoy the outdoors with his family. Theo had a very close relationship with all of those that were in his life. He kept in constant communication with his family, and he made it a point to spend time with everyone that he cared about. His friends were a tight-knit group that had grown up together, so he had a really good support system and a bunch of people cheering him on in his adventures. And in 2018, he had a really big adventure planned. Theo was out of high school and about to start college for an engineering degree. So, as tradition goes, he was heading out to do a bit of soul searching and sightseeing, really getting a taste of freedom before he settled into his studies and his adult life really began. And one place that he always wanted to go and explore was Australia. Theo's godfather, Jean-Philippe, who goes by JP, lived there with his wife, and Theo's cousin, Lisa, had also moved there months prior. So he wasn't kind of going out there willy-nilly. He scheduled a trip to spend time with loved ones, and also he had some fun stops along the way for some solo exploring. And his mom did what every mom would do and warned him about all of her worries. Australia is a relatively safe place, which did make her feel better, but it can also be dangerous like everywhere else in the world. And backpacking just in general comes with its risks. But Theo was very reassuring. He is a bit of a type A personality, so careful planning went into every single thing that he did. Theo didn't do anything on a whim. That was just not his character. He was very analytical and cautious. He knew how to navigate terrain, weigh risks when he was out, and he knew how to take care of himself. So in November of 2018, he flew from Belgium to Victoria with a working holiday visa to start his trip, staying with JP, his godfather, and his wife. Theo stayed with JP for about a month before heading off to spend New Year's with his cousin Lisa, who was living in Sydney. He had grown up with her his whole entire life, so they were really excited to reunite, and they also had plans to work together in different areas of Australia. So first, after the holiday was over, they both headed to Melbourne to work the Australia Open. This was an awesome experience for Theo by all accounts, and after about a month of the two living in Melbourne, they made their way back to Victoria for their next stop. From my understanding, they spent a little bit of time working at a farm in the area, and eventually they parted ways. And at this point, Theo was completely on his own, and he wanted to stop as many places as he possibly could for the remainder of his trip. He traveled all over to locations like Tasmania, Fraser Island, Darwin, and the list just keeps on going. And according to his friends and family, he was having the time of his life. He posted all over social media, sharing photos of his trip. He gave consistent updates to his friends and his family, but his time in Australia was coming to an end. And while that was definitely a bummer for Theo, he was also ready to come home. At least that's what he was telling everyone. The final destination for his trip was Byron Bay, and Byron Bay is a beautiful coastal town on the southeastern tip of New South Wales, and it's really just a tourist dream for beach life and ocean exploration. There's great surfing, which is probably what it's most famous for, scuba diving, there's beautiful beaches and fun bars and restaurants, and if you go at the right time of year, you can even catch a glimpse of a humpback whale. So really, it was kind of the perfect way to end his trip. So on May 25th, 2019, at around 2 p.m., Theo arrived in this beautiful town. He checked in at Wake Up Hostel, and yes, I know that some people pronounce it hostel. I have always grown up pronouncing it hostel. Maybe that's just like the southern accent in me coming out. So that's how you're going to hear it in the rest of this video. But anyways, he checked in, paid in full, and his planned checkout date was Monday, June the 3rd. Now on May 30th or May 31st, I couldn't really get a good grasp because I've seen both dates. Theo spoke to his mom and told her that he was still having a great time, but he was very ready to come home. He was so excited to see his family. He was so excited to see his friends. And he even asked if they could have a homecoming party so that they could all be together when he got back. But the next few days passed and Theo didn't reach out to his mom again. And this was very unlike him. He had maintained contact pretty much on a daily basis since he had been gone. And so she went to check his Facebook, and alarmingly, that hadn't been updated either. And he had also been putting pictures up there regularly. He hadn't had any posts at all since May 31st. So out of worry, his mom decided to contact JP to see if maybe he had heard from Theo. Now, JP told her he hadn't spoken to Theo either, and initially, they kind of tried to chalk it up to the idea that there may just be poor cell reception in that area, and he went off adventuring and is just totally fine, and this is an overreaction. But I feel like something in their gut, they just knew that was them being very, very hopeful. And everything came crashing down just a few days later. Theo was supposed to check out of his hostel on the 3rd and head back to spend a few days with JP before flying back to Brussels to his family. And Theo never showed up to stay with JP. JP ended up calling around and was notified that Theo had never used his bus ticket to leave Byron Bay. So at this point, it was feeling like an emergency situation because Theo would never skip out on his plans. He worked so hard to put all of these together. He wouldn't stop all contact with his family, and he was so excited to finish off his trip for a few days with JP before heading home. So on June 6th, a week after he had last been heard from, they called into Byron Bay police to report Theo as missing. And at the exact same time, Wake Up Hostel also called to let them know that Theo had never checked out on June 3rd, and he had left all of his belongings behind, including his passport. So at this point, police needed some sort of timeline. So they went to the hostel to question them about his bunkmates, when they last saw him, if he mentioned going somewhere, or potentially not going home. So according to the hostel, he was in a room with 8 other people, and all of them said that Theo mainly kept to himself. He was friendly enough, he would have casual conversation with them, but it's not like he divulged any deep, dark secrets about where he was going or that he didn't want to go home or any of those things. And they actually said that he didn't do much really at all while he was there, including sightseeing, which was kind of the purpose of why he went. They said that they mainly saw him lying on his bunk watching movies on his phone. So this seemed to support the idea that he was just kind of tired from his trip. He was so ready to be back. He was telling his friends that he couldn't wait to sleep in his actual bed. But on the night of May 31st, he decided to go out and have a little bit of fun. So Theo ended up at a barbecue that was held by the hostel. It started at around 6 p.m. that night of May 31st, and while he was there, he met a fellow backpacker named Antoine, and they hit it off. Antoine said that he and Theo spoke all about his adventures and that he was headed home soon, and he seemed in a great mood. Nothing was wrong, and at around 7 p.m., Theo and Antoine decided to take a shuttle into town where they stopped at a liquor store, and they purchased 2 liters of rosé and then took the Uber back to the hostel. Now, CCTV was able to confirm at the store when they arrived. It showed Antoine himself making the purchase of this alcohol, and Theo seemed to just be tagging along. So they started to wonder if maybe alcohol could have played a part in Theo's disappearance. Once Theo and Antoine got back to the hostel, they went back to the area where the barbecue is being held and ended up talking with a handful of other backpackers. Not really clear if Theo drank any of the rosé that had been purchased by Antoine or if it was purchased for Antoine's use only, but what all of the backpackers were able to confirm was that at no point during the night did Theo seem intoxicated or even tipsy. The manager of the hostel was able to confirm that they hadn't served any free alcohol at the barbecue, but there was a small store on premises where it could be purchased. But when they checked into this, according to Theo's bank records, he hadn't bought any. During this time, Theo went on to text his stepsister and said he was planning to go out with this group of friends. He said that he was probably going to be slow to respond, and that was why. And at around 9 p.m. that night, all of these people hopped into 2 shuttle buses for a little bar called the Cheeky Monkey. CCTV footage was collected from the bar, and it showed Theo arrived with his backpacking friends around 9:35 p.m. And again, everything seemed okay. He did stumble while walking into the door, but it was really hard to tell if, again, maybe intoxication played a part or if maybe he just stumbled on his own feet. And again, the witnesses say he was totally fine. Now, everyone hung out at a few tables inside of the Cheeky Monkey, and according to bank records and CCTV, they were able to confirm that the entire night, Theo only bought 2 beers. One at 9:51 p.m. and the second at 10:13. And from this point on, the group kind of dispersed. Some of them were sitting at other tables, others were dancing, including Theo, and CCTV seemed to show that he was having a great time. But roughly an hour later at 11 p.m., security suddenly approached Theo and kicked him out of the bar. Now, when authorities asked security why on earth Theo got kicked out, security at the Cheeky Monkey said they kicked him out due to, quote, approaching intoxication. They told police that he had been very cooperative and understanding and caused them no issues as they escorted him out. It wasn't like a big problem. He wasn't just like belligerently drunk. Again, we have this suggestion that maybe he was intoxicated, but a lot of the details just aren't adding up to that, especially when police pressed the security guards about why they believed he was, quote, approaching intoxication. And it turned out they had no reason to believe that he was drunk at all when they asked him to leave. They ended up telling authorities that they saw him lose his balance at one point, and out of an overabundance of caution, they decided to cut him off. They said that his demeanor was completely normal, everything seemed totally fine, they just didn't want to get in trouble. And when I dug a little bit deeper into this, it turns out that Byron Bay's liquor laws are very, very strict, and over-serving is taken very seriously, which is likely why when someone gets kicked out of a bar in Byron Bay, they are banned from every other bar in the area for the remainder of the night. They literally take your picture and share it so you can't get in anywhere. The fines and the charges for over-serving always land back on the venue or the server, so no one really plays around with it. And it seems that this was one of those situations. They couldn't say for sure, he had only had 2 beers, but they didn't want to risk it. But this also meant that Theo was separated from his friends all alone late at night in an area he was unfamiliar with. And when I'm telling you that this is giving me horrible Riley Strain flashbacks, it is legitimately almost identical. But with Theo, he was used to traveling alone, so it really wasn't the biggest deal when this happened. He was fully capable of taking care of himself. He had carted himself over an entire country at this point. Police and his family figured that at this point, he likely headed back to his hostel, and maybe he just got lost along the way. Theo's family immediately flew in and searches began. His father made a desperate plea to anyone that may know where he went.
Guys, if you have any information, and if you do not want to deal with the cops, or if you are afraid to come forward, please make an anonymous call to Crime Stoppers. I promise Theo's little brother, Lucas, that I would bring his brother home. Please, help me keep my promise to him. People have the power. Let love rule. Thank you.
They canvassed every possible area around the bar and every route that Theo could have taken to get back to the hostel, but there didn't seem to be any sign of him. Locals started to come together as well, putting up flyers and holding volunteer searches. It was really scary that this 18-year-old backpacker walked out of a bar, not even intoxicated, and vanished into thin air. Australian police seemed very focused on speaking to the hostel and the ground searches, so Theo's family decided to go a different route, and they worked quickly to get surveillance from all around the area in hopes that it may have captured the direction he went. And they did end up getting one possible sighting of him on CCTV near Shirley Street. And this street is in the exact direction that he would have gone to head back to the hostel. So searches started there, and they also expanded to the swampland around the hostel itself as a worst case scenario. But ultimately, Theo's mom was able to determine that the person seen on CCTV on Shirley wasn't her son. So at this point, they were back to square one, and they still had no way to confirm that Theo had even headed back to his accommodations, and all of the searching could be in the wrong place. And according to the CCTV footage at the Cheeky Monkey, he may have gone in the opposite direction, but it was really hard to tell. And the frustrations with the investigation in Australia really began at this point. Thankfully, there was also an investigation that was going on in Brussels, and they knew right away that any sort of data from Theo's phone was going to be critical in finding him and narrowing down where he may have gone after leaving the bar. But when Theo's family approached Byron Bay Police about this, Byron Bay Police said that privacy laws in Australia were going to make doing that very, very difficult. And it may take even months to just get a court order alone to get the information. So at this point, it was left up to his family and Belgian police to try and get into whatever they could and hope that Australia would even be able to do anything with what they found. Now, Australian police did start the process of getting data from phone pings, but anything beyond that, they seemed to say was out of their reach. Now, thankfully, Belgian police knew about making an EDR request, or an emergency disclosure request, which is something that Australian authorities didn't seem to be familiar with at all. So basically, this is something that government agencies can fill out and send to major social media sites or phone companies that hold data, things like Google and Facebook, just all of those big name things that can potentially be tracking your phone, and it expedites access to that data if authorities believe that someone's life is in danger. Because you guys know, if you have been looking into true crime for any period of time, sometimes these companies will sit and wait the absolute longest they can to hand over any data. And that is just not time that you can mess around with when it comes to a missing persons case. So by June 9th, Belgian police had submitted an EDR to Google using one of Theo's email addresses. And while they were waiting for a response back, ground searches were still ongoing in Byron Bay. And his family was also working to guess Theo's passwords, hoping they could get into his account faster. I know that they did manage to get into his Facebook, and they gave that information to the police, but I don't think police ultimately ended up doing anything with it because they just didn't have correct permissions in the form of court orders, which again is a very, very slow process in Australia. And around this time, information came back from Theo's phone company about his last pings. So really, this was the first time they were getting any sort of solid information to show where Theo may have gone after leaving the Cheeky Monkey. So it turned out that Theo's phone sent off a handful of pings just after midnight on June 1st. And this continued until around noon that day, hours and hours after he had last been seen. And the very last ping suggested that he was on the Watego Beach side of the headland of Byron Bay near the lighthouse. This was a very scary place for him to be and go missing at. One, why did he go there? It was the opposite direction of his hostel. And two, it is incredibly dangerous terrain. If he went down onto any of the rocky areas around there, he could have fallen off of the cliffs and into the ocean. But it was really difficult to narrow down for sure where he was because his phone was hitting other towers as well that suggested he was on the complete opposite side of the headland by Tallow Beach. So this this is a massive area for authorities to search. There's cliffs, there's lots of different trails, it's a ton of bush. It was going to be a very difficult search. So on June 16th, authorities tried to recreate the activity that Theo's phone showed by walking all around Watego's side of the headland. And ultimately, it did seem to show that those random pings from the Tallow Beach side may have been just that, just random pings that got messed up due to the topography of the area. So at this point, they decided it was pretty safe to start heavily searching on that Watego side and not really worry about the Tallow Beach side. In the particular area of Watego's beach, there are a few residential neighborhoods. There's obviously a beach. There are a few walking trails. There's also the famous Cape Byron Lookout and the lighthouse. And he would have had some sort of familiarity with the area because out of the entire trip so far at Byron Bay, the only place they were able to confirm that Theo went aside from his hostel and the Cheeky Monkey was this area by the lighthouse. So search teams set out to look for him. There were helicopters and dogs. They brought out drones, and some searches were even done on hands and knees with officers in a line trying to find any sign of Theo. And then suddenly there was a huge break because at this point it had been like over a week, 2 weeks maybe of searching, and they had just had nothing. However, this break suggested that they were potentially looking in the wrong place this entire time. Google ended up getting back to Belgian authorities, and it opened up an endless load of information. So thank goodness for the EDR. Theo's every movement, even down to his pace of walking, had been tracked that night through Google Timeline. So now they didn't have to rely on those phone pings, which are definitely helpful, but they have such a large radius as opposed to Google Timeline, which is accurate within meters for the most part. Theo's family immediately wanted to get this information to Australian authorities, but it was tricky, again, because of privacy laws. So Theo's family ended up having to go into the police station with their own laptops to show Byron Bay police the Google Timeline. Like, the police are standing around and they're having to scroll through everything while Byron Bay police are jotting down notes. They couldn't even physically go through it themselves, which is so bizarre to me. And I feel like their lack of understanding of Google Timeline led to a lot of questioning when it comes to how accurate the Google locations were. How detailed it was amazing, but it also made Theo's disappearance that much more bizarre. So here is the updated timeline. CCTV and the GPS data from Google confirmed that Theo had been kicked out of the bar at 11:03 p.m. And CCTV showed him head toward Kingsley Street, and while he was heading that direction, he was on his phone. They were able to look into his phone data and confirm that he had been pulling up directions at the time to the hostel that he was staying in. But despite this making it seem like he was going to head back to his room, Theo instead went the opposite direction. Now, authorities and his family theorized that maybe Theo just decided to take a different and quieter route back to the hostel. He walked at a normal pace through a more residential area and eventually turned to head back towards the beach. And from there, he could have then taken the beach all the way back to the hostel, which honestly sounds like a fantastic walk, so this made sense. During this walk, Theo looked up directions to his hostel a total of 8 times, and it was kind of like a parallel route that he took, so it seemed like he was looking it up so many times to keep his bearings. And then all of a sudden, things changed. The path that he was taking took him by a questionable area of town. There's a local park and something that's referred to as the cricket nets. And this area is apparently known for possible drug activity. There is a homeless encampment there. And Theo, for some reason, stopped in that area for a total of 7 minutes. Now, nobody is sure what he could have been doing there during that time, but we do know that while he was there, he had Google Maps open and he zoomed in and out several times times to the very immediate surrounding area. And then, instead of heading toward the beach, which was what was expected, Theo cut down another street going even further away from his hostel. And his pace also seemed to change. He was walking much faster at this point, so everything he was doing seemed very intentional. And he took several turns as if he knew exactly where he was going. But he hadn't entered any new addresses into his Google Maps at this point, so how on earth was he so sure of where he was going? And it seemed like the end goal of this walk was Tallow Beach. And that just made the walk even stranger because, according to locals that have looked into this, of all of the ways that you could get to Tallow Beach, the way he took was the least obvious way. But it just continues to get weirder. Keeping the same fast pace as before, Theo took a very sudden turn and entered a national park and went onto a trail that weaves behind Tallow Beach. And the entrance for this trail is not lit. It's not really marked well. The trail isn't lit or marked well to be used at night at least. And the trailhead is situated between two houses in a random neighborhood. And he just continues onto this unlit path through absolute darkness in the bush without any hesitation whatsoever. Now, upon hearing this information, everyone was flabbergasted. This particular area isn't an area anyone but locals would know about. While the trail and the national park aren't a secret by any means, this entrance is kind of like a random side entrance that's typically used by people that live in the immediate area and not tourists. But the path he takes just continues to get stranger and stranger. After following the melon track for some time, he suddenly goes off the beaten path onto a random fire trail, and he follows this for a while before going off trail completely into incredibly thick bushland. I'm talking vines, really low-lying trees, there's thick thorny bushes, a difficult place for anyone to even get through during the daytime, so trying to go through that at night unlit, it sounds like an absolute nightmare. And what was so strange is that, again, it just seems like he knew exactly where he was going. Like, this was a walk that he had taken several times in his life, like a daily thing to get to the beach or something. And to make it even weirder, his path shows that he made this wide berth around a homeless encampment that was set up randomly in the middle of the bush. But there was no way that he could have known that that was there. Now, by 11:48 p.m., he had exited from this extreme bush onto Tallow Beach, and he proceeded to walk up Tallow Beach to a place called Cozy Corner, which is a little cove area by the headland and the lighthouse. But then he made yet another unexpected move. At the very end of the beach there, or at least somewhere along that stretch, there is a narrow opening that goes into the bush, like this very secretive place that you wouldn't know was there at night, according to everyone that has been to the area, which is probably why it's known as a party spot for the locals. So he was in this opening and essentially kept going down until he hit another wall of bush that he couldn't get past. And his phone showed that he hung out around this area for about 5 minutes. I did have Google Maps pulled up at this time, so maybe he was thinking he could get through somewhere in this area. But eventually, after hanging out there, he turned around and went back towards the beach. And at this point, it was around midnight, and his phone GPS showed that he went to sit on this large rock, still in Cozy Corner, and then suddenly, his GPS data turns off. Police theorize that maybe he did this to save his battery, but to me, that makes no sense because of what he did next. For the next hour, Theo stays in this area, sending messages to friends, having casual conversations. He even put on one of his favorite Belgian comedy shows on YouTube. And all of his friends stated that they fully believe it was him that they were talking to. There was nothing at all to indicate that he was in distress at this point. He didn't suggest that he was lost to anyone. He seemed totally fine, just out in this random location at midnight. But if he was trying to save phone battery, I don't feel like he would shut his GPS off, which was arguably the most important thing he needed to have running at the time. And instead, he would sit for an hour messaging people on several different apps and watching a phone battery draining video for a while. Because that GPS data was turned off, they didn't have as accurate of a picture of what happened after this, and they really had to just rely on those regular phone pings, which, according to the police, somehow landed him on the other side of the headland. But again, those final phone pings were so strange because we know that he was active until around 1 or so in the morning when he sent off his last messages, but all of a sudden his phone goes silent, and it was silent for a matter of hours. Several messages were sent back to him that went undelivered, and then suddenly Theo's phone reconnected to his network at 6:17 a.m. on June 1st. But it doesn't seem that it was because of any activity. It seems more likely that the phone had been on the entire time, but for some reason just lost signal for those few hours or something along those lines. Honestly, we can't say for certain, but the phone remains on until it finally stops at 1:47 p.m. that day. Now, his family strongly believed at this point that Theo met someone when he was at the cricket nets. Based on the speed of his walking, the intentional direction that he went, it seemed like he was following someone this entire way. Maybe this person suggested that they go to this party spot at the beach to see if anything was going on, or because it's just a nice place to hang out, or they could have had other nefarious plans. It was just very out of character for Theo to do all of this on his own that night. Because again, while he was an adventurous guy, he calculated risks very thoroughly. And this was just not something he would have been comfortable doing. So with this new information, more searches started now on the other side of the headland near Tallow Beach. But police didn't seem to be taking the Google timeline as very solid information. Again, I think it was just because they were unfamiliar with it. And according to Theo's family, at this point it seemed that authorities had already made their mind up, that this was all an accident, that he fell victim to misadventure. They completely blocked out any other possible theories. But according to an inquest that was later done, police did do a handful of things to try and look into other possibilities, maybe. I don't really know what their intentions were, but we do know that they spoke to one person from that homeless camp by the nets, and they apparently had no helpful information. They also went and spoke to someone that was staying at the homeless camp in that beach area by Tallow Beach, and they also had nothing to contribute and said they didn't see or hear anything strange at all that night. At this point, police ended up announcing that the evidence they had from the phone pings, not Google timeline, indicated that Theo had likely scaled the cliffs of the headland and fallen into the ocean. They speculated that maybe he was trying to get up to the lighthouse, or maybe he was trying to get to some of those main neighborhood roads to circle back to his hostel, and something happened and he never made it. They did more reenactments to try and confirm the location of the pings, and even had someone scale and then rappel down some of the cliffs in various locations to see if the pings would give the same results. And they loosely seemed to, but again, it's such a huge area and hard to know for sure. They also decided to bring out cadaver dogs to try and prove their theory, but from what I have seen, they didn't make any hits. But authorities felt that this was really the most likely scenario. So after 6 weeks, they called off the searches and went with their theory. But those that knew Theo and even locals were just not satisfied with this because Theo still hadn't been found, and it just felt like more time was spent in the wrong location than in the last areas that he was known to be.
Somebody knows something. He wasn't alone, and somebody knows something and has stayed silent. There's something terribly wrong going on, and that needs to be found out.
Theo also wasn't the only odd disappearance or known death in that specific area. There are a handful of people that have gone missing in those back trails or have been found dead in those back trails. So there's a lot of speculation going around locally. And because of this, locals and Theo's family decided to continue searching along that Google timeline path. And they stumbled upon something that the police had missed. When Theo went went off of the milne track, off of the beaten path into the bush, he lost the hat that he had been wearing along the way, and volunteers found it just lying on the ground in an area that police had already searched. And according to Theo's family, this was his favorite hat, and it was so odd had he just been meandering on his own, like authorities were suggesting, that he would drop his hat and not stop to pick it up. So it just added to the speculation of what could have been going on there. Now, could he have dropped it and couldn't see well enough to find it? Maybe, but the timeline suggested there was no pause in his movement at all in that area. He just kept on pushing, and that was weird. And it almost makes me wonder if he had been following someone initially, got a bad vibe when they went away from the public area onto a dark trail, so he decided to cut into the woods and make a quick getaway, and he just couldn't afford to stop and look for his hat. But again, that is just pure speculation. That hat would end up being the only piece of Theo that anyone would find, at least to this point. Months and years passed, there was still no sign of Theo. Volunteer searches at this point were the only ongoing searches. The public was still trying to help in whatever way they could, and then finally a coroner's inquest was held in 2022. And this inquest was specifically done to look into the investigation by Australian authorities just to make sure that it was a thorough one and they hadn't ignored any possibilities. And it was also going to call the possible cause and manner of death, because at this point, that is what was presumed. The inquest ended up determining that Theo is likely deceased. After all of this time and with all of the details, it's just not likely that he ran off for a new life somewhere. There was no history of mental illness or pre-existing conditions that would have suggested he took his own life either, so they were able to pretty confidently rule that out. However, the coroner was not able to determine a cause or a manner of death due to lack of evidence. So instead, she just speculated on the main possible theories, and she ended up finding that both misadventure and foul play were a possibility in Theo's case. Now, when it comes to misadventure, the location that Theo was known to be in, as I've already stated numerous times at this point, was a potentially dangerous one. Had he scaled the cliffs like the police believed, he could have easily fallen. However, experts seem to be at odds with how possible it was that he would have landed in the ocean, with many experts stating that it was way more likely he would have fallen and ended up stuck on the rocks closer towards the bottom. But what experts did seem to agree on was that had he fallen into the water, the chances he would wash ashore were slim to none. In this particular area of Cozy Corner, there is a constant rip current that pulls you directly out and into the East Australian current. And that night in particular, the EAC was very close to the shore. So all it would have taken was one wrong slip just above the waterline for him to fall directly into that rip current, be pulled out to the EAC, and at that point, he could have gone north or south on the current and likely would never show up again, which is absolutely heartbreaking. However, it also brought up a pretty valid question. If he fell in the water, why was his phone still on until almost 2 p.m. that day in that same location? Now, the coroner speculated that if he had been holding his phone for light while scaling these cliffs, that he may have fallen one way and the phone the other, and it very easily could have gotten stuck in a crack or under some foliage, and police only knew to look for the phone during a handful of their searches before everything was ultimately called off. And honestly, there are just too many places to look, and the danger of trying to look in these places make it very difficult to find a phone if it is there. Just that, if the phone had fallen low enough down the cliff, the rising tide easily could have pulled it out to sea. However, my question in this is, if this climb was as treacherous as everyone is claiming, I don't feel like he would have had his phone in his hand. I think it's way more likely he would have put his phone in his pocket to be able to use both of his hands at all times. So again, with conflicting push and pull possibilities, which leads us to the next possibility of foul play. The coroner made it very clear that this whole entire journey to this area that Theo took was out of character based on every single person that spoke to authorities. Every single person that knew him said this is not right. And the reality of what that trail would have been like and how it was only typically known by locals was really focused on. Even detectives and seasoned searchers had admitted that this was a very intimidating and challenging trail in complete darkness. Like even they, with their flashlights and proper gear and people knowing where they were, didn't want to go and walk into this. And in the 60-minute Australia episode, they do go at night and try to walk through this bush. It's just darkness. You cannot see a single thing. And for someone unfamiliar with the area to take that or even know about it is so unlikely. And then after discussing these different theories, the inquest turned towards the investigation that was done by Australian authorities. And it was noted that police could have and should have focused more on the area that Theo's hat ultimately ended up being found by volunteers long after police had called off their ground searches. They had performed so many searches on the wrong side of the headland on hands and knees, but only briefly searched the Tallow Beach side, again, because they just didn't put weight into Google, and they missed a key piece of evidence because of it. And while they did briefly look into who he may have spoken to at the nets, they ultimately only questioned one person who in no way could have full knowledge of everyone in the camp at the time. It just seems like they put a ton of effort into his case, but just not where it needed to be, and that's so unfortunate. But it seems that Australian authorities owned up to all of this, lots of things they could have done better, and they plan to do better in the future. Now, ultimately, the inquest made a handful of recommendations because Theo's case ended up highlighting so many downfalls in the protocol and missing persons cases in Australia. The coroner recommended a whole bunch of things that I have down below. I have the whole inquest document down below, but mainly they recommended that police be given the ability to access CCTV and electronic data much faster so accurate searches can be done sooner. If they had been able to immediately focus all of their efforts into getting all of his location data, I mean, what app at this point doesn't constantly track your every movement? Their efforts might have been focused in the right place from the get-go. They also recommended that youth tourism in New South Wales put more protocol in place that would alert authorities sooner if a backpacker or traveler fails to check out and leaves important belongings behind. It was 3 days past checkout and 6 days since he last showed up to the hostel before they called to alert anyone. And that was precious time that was wasted. We have seen time and time again that misadventure and young men at bars or alone at night can easily end in accidental tragedy. But in this case, I really do question if Theo wasn't alone that night. He hadn't anticipated being kicked out of the bar, so I find it hard to believe that he suddenly, within moments of having his entire night plans torn apart, he decided to take this long and very specific journey that he never had before. There just isn't enough information to know for sure. While he easily could have been using Google Maps so much to keep his bearings on a solo adventure, he also could have been using it to see where on earth someone was leading him to. Also wonder if someone told him about this area by the nets, that maybe he could go meet someone there for whatever reason. Maybe that's why he stopped there for 7 minutes, zooming in and zooming out of the area, trying to find a spot in the nets in particular. I do know that drugs have been brought up as a possibility, and obviously there's no way you can fully rule that kind of thing out, but according to his friends and family, he wasn't even a heavy drinker. You saw he had 2 beers that night. He wasn't into using drugs. It just doesn't seem like the most likely scenario. Now, to this day, the case is still technically open, but I'm unsure of how it is labeled, as just a death investigation or still as misadventure. But what I do know is that his family is still searching for him and anyone who may have answers as to what happened that night. They still strongly feel that Theo wasn't alone. To get to the bottom of what happened, New South Wales and the police commissioner have announced a $500,000 reward for the discovery of Theo or the circumstances of his disappearance. And that is a pretty large reward. So I'm unsure sure if they put that out there to maybe placate his family or because they genuinely feel maybe they missed something and Theo was a victim of foul play. I'm interested to hear what you guys think about this case down below, and I hope that ultimately those that love him are able to find some sort of answers. And since there is this large reward out there, maybe someone that knows something has said something to someone else and eventually the information will come forward. If this is just a case of misadventure, I hope that you guys at least take something from this. Anything can happen to anyone, and having a good plan in place when you go out with friends or out with strangers if you're backpacking, just check off every single box. On that note, I'm going to go ahead and go, you guys. If you have any information at all in Theo's disappearance, I have all of the numbers and contacts down below for you to get that information into the right hands. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to listen to Theo's story. And if you haven't already, go ahead and hit the subscribe button down below to become a part of the Hallen fam so that we can hopefully bring them home together or bring them justice together. And I will see you guys in my next video. Bye.